Hello and welcome to Kangaroo English. I'm Christian.
I'm Sophie.
And today we are going to be learning all about Australian English. So we are here today at Caversham Wildlife Park in Western Australia with two beautiful koalas, Karen and Sienna. Are they mother and daughter?
Yeah.
Okay, mother and daughter. And we're here with Sophie. She's a linguist from UWA, University of Western Australia. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure, I come from France originally. I'm now studying linguistics at the University of Western Australia. I'm a French native speaker, but I actually study Australian English, and I've lived in the UK, in the US, and then got here to Australia, so I have a bit of a sense for the differences in between the different varieties.
Okay. Well, today we're going to be looking at pronunciation. We're going to be looking at vocabulary, and also some of the interesting features of Australian English. So should we go and start?
Let's have.
Okay. Excellent. So before we talk about Australian English today, let's talk a little bit about the history of Australian English, where it came from, because now Australian English is a fully recognised dialect of English, no?
Yes, definitely. Yeah. The way it started out though was obviously different people from parts of the UK mainly that came all the way to Australia, but they spoke different dialects of English. Some did not actually even speak English.
Yeah, I think there was Irish people, Welsh people, Scottish people, and they didn't speak English at all, right?
So basically, when you have people from different parts of the UK coming together, they need to understand each other. And so there's a leveling of the different languages and the different dialects that happen. And this is what, over the years, became Australian English.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And at first, during the early 1800s, when the colonialists would come to visit Australia, they were in awe of this new language. They were amazed. They thought it was amazing. In fact, one commentator said in 1800, she said, "The children born in Australia and now grown up speak a better language, purer, more harmonious than is generally the case in most parts of England."
It's very interesting how language attitudes change. A language, a dialect in itself is a perfectly valid way of speaking, and over the years, for some reason, one way of speaking might have more positive vibe to it. I guess people seem to think it's more fashionable, it's more beautiful, and then you fast forward to 200 years later, and then suddenly a lot more people might actually criticize Australian English.
Yes, well, this was exactly the case because in the early 1900s, we had the invention of the posh English accent, the received pronunciation in England. The Australian accent had a terrible reputation. Winston Churchill said that the Australian English was the most brutal maltreatment which has ever been inflicted upon the mother tongue of the great English-speaking nations.
Don't listen to Winston Churchill when it comes to language and accents.
Exactly. So, and now we have this beautiful language, beautiful dialect, Australian English, which, love it or hate it, is what we have now. Okay, so now let's get a bit more technical, and we're going to start looking at Australian English pronunciation. Is there just one Australian accent?
Okay, so across Australia, which is a very large country, it's actually fairly similar.
Okay.
There are some regional differences, but they're not as big, for instance, as you find them in the UK or in the US.
Yeah, okay.
What is actually more striking are the three sort of different types of accents that you have, which is basically the cultivated, the general, and then the broad Australian English accent.
Okay. So a broad Australian accent would be someone like Steve Irwin,
Yes,
or
Tivo,
Crocodile Dundee. Okay.
would be a beautiful example. But there's a tendency, though, overall, for people to speak more and more in this general accent.
Okay.
So slowly moving away from the more cultivated, which has maybe a bit of a stigma. There's the tall poppy syndrome in Australia. We don't really like people bragging about or maybe trying to stand out, as in maybe a posh sort of way. So maybe that's why there's a bit of a switch.
I think we got that from the Irish heritage, I think. The Australian accent has been described in lots of different ways, positive and negative. Some people say it sounds like music, very friendly, very open and warm. Other people think it sounds like very nasal, or like a bird, or like you're drunk. And in fact, there've been lots of theories about why Australians have the accent, and I think they're myths, right? Some theories, for example, that the Australians keep their mouth closed because of there's too much pollen in the air, or they keep their mouths closed because there's so many flies, or because they're squinting at the sun, they keep their mouths closed, or even that. Because we're drunk all the time, we sound like this.
Oh my goodness. Am I allowed to swear, Christian? Can I say that this is bullshit? Okay, don't believe any of that. There is absolutely no truth in any of those. It's never been proven, and it's really silly theories.
Yeah.
The accent just develops naturally over time. This is just the way people speak, and some languages have different sounds. I mean, in languages of the world, you have languages which actually use clicks. This is the sound, in your language, and it's neither, better or worse than any sound. And so whether you say time or time, and it sounds more or less Australian, it's perfectly valid.
But I think what's interesting is that all of these myths, these theories, they do have one thing in common, which is the idea of keeping your mouth closed. And actually, physically speaking, this is one actually a true thing about Australian English pronunciation, is that we tend to have the mouth more closed and the tongue higher. So that's something that you can remember at home when you're trying to replicate some of the Australian English sounds. Okay. Yes, it's true that the mouth is more closed, the tongue is more higher. So now let's look more closely at some of the Australian English vowels specifically. Okay. Okay. And it's raining. Yes.
What the hell, Australia?
In Australia, it does rain sometimes, apparently. Okay, so now we're going to look specifically at Australian English vowels, right? Because the consonants are basically no different from any other dialects of English.
Yeah, it's not the features that will strike you when you hear an Australian English accent, but if you're used to some British accents or some American accents, you'll definitely hear the difference. I know when I arrived in Australia and met a lovely lady at the cashier who said to me, "How's your day been?" It took me a while to understand what she meant. So it's like any new variety of English or a new language that you are confronted with. Initially, it takes a little bit of time to adjust just because the words are pronounced slightly differently.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so the first sound we're going to look at is the E sound. Okay, so what you will notice with this vowel in Australian English is that normally you have a more pronounced diphthong, which means that it's not just one sound; it's two sounds. So this will change. Okay, so what we're going to listen to some native speakers pronouncing this word. Okay, and we're going to listen for the more pronounced change in the vowel, and we're going to listen for the vowel to become longer. Normally, the more broad the accent, the longer the vowel. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay. So let's listen.
Beat.
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 Beat. Beat. Beat.
Okay. So the next sound is the oo sound. Okay. So in British pronunciation, received pronunciation, or American, you're going to have much more of the lips like an oo sort of sound, more oo, but you'll notice in Australian that it's much more back, and it's produced sort of at the front behind the teeth. So like ooh, okay. So let's listen to some people saying boot.
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 Boot. Boot. Boot.
The next one is this vowel here in say. There's a famous story of an English lady in an Australian hospital, and they told her, "You're going home to die," and she thought that she was going home to die, but they were saying, "You're going home today." So we're going to just listen for this sound to change from a very open A sound to a very mouth closed sort of oi, oi. Okay.
Say.
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 The next one is this sound here in so. So similar to the first one, we're just going to look for the change in the vowel, the diphthong. So we're going to have two vowel sounds here, and it's going to be much longer. Okay, you're going to hear a difference.
So.
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 Okay, so the next one is high. So again, with this, you're going to have something similar to this one here, where you're going to have it moving more towards like the oi in choice, more like an I sound. Okay, so we're just going to listen for this to really change from high, very mouth open. It's not going to be mouth open like high. It's going to be more like mouth closed, hoy. Okay.
Hi.
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 Okay, so finally we have the how sound, and again in most British and American dialects it would be very mouth open like, and lips are how, but you'll notice in Australian English again the mouth is more closed, and it's more like an E, like hell. Here's like the air, like the air in dress. Hell.
How.
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 So you probably will have noticed that you know not everybody pronounces it the same, and there's a lot of variation in the pronunciation.
I mean, you can listen how Christian talks, and then when he does some of these sounds, so not every single Australian English speaker will have such a broad Australian English accent, but it gives you a bit of an idea for the differences and what to look for.
So the next aspect of pronunciation is what's called the trap bath split. So in America, generally, these two A's would be the same. But in British and Australian English, we have a difference between the two. And in British, it depends on which dialect you're speaking. But in Australian, they're always very different. Okay. So this would be more like a trap, and this could be like a ba. So let's listen to some native speakers pronouncing some words which have the short A, and then the long A.
Father.
Maths.
Class.
Gas.
Basket.
Plastic.
Castle. Ant.
Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about the R in Australian English. Australian English is a non-rhotic dialect.
It is a very technical term, just to explain that in some cases the R, for instance, at the end of a word will actually be pronounced or not, whether you'll hear it.
Yeah, exactly. Normally if the R follows a vowel sound, like in this case, or here, it follows a vowel sound, we don't pronounce the R. Whereas in North American accents, normally you do. So for example, this would be car and arm. But in this case, if you have two vowels with an R in between, then yes, you will pronounce the R. So this would be car alarm.
Because you're doing the liaison,
Yes.
very French word, to explain that the pronunciation of this letter is kind of triggered, I guess, by the following vowel.
Yeah, exactly. And another strange thing in Australian English is that in this case, where we finish with like a flat A, like an AR sound, if we finish a word with this sound, then we insert an R, okay, where the R doesn't exist. So this would be India and Pakistan. So first, let's listen to some pronunciation of some of these non-rhotic words.
Car.
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 Horse.
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 Four.
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 Here.
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 Beer.
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 Okay, and now let's listen to some people inserting the R in some phrases.
Law and order.
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 Bacteria in it.
Bacteria in it.
Bacteria in it.
Bacteria in it.
Supernova in the sky.
Supernova in the sky.
Supernova in the sky.
Supernova in the sky.
Tuna oil.
Tuna oil.
Tuna oil.
Okay, so another aspect of Australian pronunciation, which is interesting, is the way that Australians pronounce their T's and sometimes their D's, depending on the person. Yeah, and it's with a thing that's called flapping. So normally, like a full T, you have to bring up your tongue and you have to touch the roof of your mouth and you release the air, but it's a lot of effort. Okay, when you're speaking, it's a lot of physical effort.
Yeah.
So it's much faster to just very quickly with your tongue just tap the roof of your mouth like this. And this is what you'll hear with a lot of Australian accents. So instead of saying butter, they'd say butter. And also sometimes with the D. So instead of saying ladder, which again you have to touch the palate of the roof of your mouth, you just say ladder. Yeah? Do you think it makes it more difficult to understand?
I don't think it makes it more difficult to understand once you know. It's always about variation. So once you know those sounds, you'll be fine.
So let's listen to some people pronouncing some words with the T's and the D's, and just listen for that disappearing T and the disappearing D.
Riding. Atom. Bitter. Waiter. Wedding. Ladder.
One more aspect of Australian pronunciation with the Australian L.
Which is sometimes called a dark L.
A
So
dark
we're
L.
moving to the dark side now. Don't be scared.
And it's called a dark L because we don't really pronounce it properly like a light L. A light L is when you touch the tongue on the roof of your mouth behind your teeth. La, la, la. Well, sometimes in Australian English this L disappears. We don't touch the roof of our mouth. We just raise the tongue a little bit. So you have half of the L sound, the dark L. So for example, instead of being coal, this would be coal or howl. So sometimes there can be no difference between howl with an L and how, like how are you? And even now, some very posh people in England, like Prince Charles, doesn't pronounce his L's either. So let's...
Australian English is fashionable in the UK.
So let's listen to some people pronouncing some words with the dark L.
Coal.
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 Full.
Fall.
Fall.
Always.
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 Called.
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 Film.
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 One more aspect of Australian pronunciation which is really sort of famous and people really notice is HRT, high rising terminal, or UPSPEAK.
Yeah, there are a million different ways to call it, but the idea is when you reach the end of your sentence and you actually rise the tone. So it's got to do with more generally pronunciation of maybe an entire sentence. And so people say that it sounds a little bit like a question.
Yeah, it's also called Australian question intonation, isn't it?
It is, yes. I guess, it's probably because that's maybe where it was first noticed. I'm not sure whether this is where it was initially kind of started.
No, it seems to be all over the world now. And some people find it really annoying. They hate it.
Don't hate it. I think the idea is that when you do that, and I've seen a girl presenting one time and she was doing it a lot, but I think it was a way to ensure that people were, listening to her and understanding her point. So it's maybe, it sounds a bit less assertive maybe when you do this high rising tone, but really it tends to go unnoticed.
Yeah. So the rule is basically in general that that just before the final syllable, we just start to go up at the end. Although empirically, it's not really sure. Sometimes people go down before they go up, or sometimes they start to go up a little bit earlier. So we're going to listen to some native speakers. We're just going to ask them 5 things they did this morning when they woke up. So just listen at the end of every sentence, just listen for their little rising tone at the end, okay?
This morning I went to work. No, I got up, Read the paper, had breakfast, went to work.
Check my phone.
Eggs for breakfast. Packed my lunch for work.
Got up, had coffee, had a shower, went to carousel, had lunch with a friend.
I had breakfast, played with my dog.
I worked. I ate pasta.
So now we're going to talk a little bit about Australian vocabulary.
Yes.
And just 2 weeks ago was the new release of the Australian National Dictionary. Its first update since 1988, which is really a long time, isn't it, in dictionary terms?
It was a very long time. What's interesting as well, and you'll see on the list with dictionaries, is basically a word makes it into the dictionary once it's actually been used for a long time by people.
Yeah.
So a word like bogan, I've heard it right away, I think, when I got to Australia and people were talking to me about those peoples that are called bogans, and I was quite surprised that it only made it now in the dictionary.
Yeah, well, in the update they added 6,000 new words and phrases. We have a small selection here. So a baby chino is like a little cappuccino, but only with milk for well, not for babies, but for small children.
Well, for small children. I had a friend and she was just telling me about the fact that she had a grandson visit, and they went to a cafe and they ordered for him a baby chino.
A baby chino, yeah. Goon of Fortune. This is a game that probably university students play, where a goon is the bag which is inside a wine cask, bag in a box it's called as well.
Yes.
And you pin the bag to a clothesline and you spin the clothesline round, and then you drink whatever's in the bag. It's a drinking game for teenagers.
It is a drinking game, yes. I was taught about it by a fellow student at university. And it's obviously a play on the name of this TV show, is it? The
Wheel of Fortune, yeah, exactly.
So there's a bit of a play on words there.
A bogan, which you mentioned before, is a person similar to like a chav in England.
Yeah, redneck in the US.
Redneck, yeah, exactly.
I'm still a bit unsure, to be honest, about
it's
what
a tough
people
one
refer
to
to as bogan. No one's really been able to give me a good description, so.
Yeah, okay. A ranger. A ranger is a person with red hair. A ranger. Schmick. Schmick is when something's like really, really good. You say, wow, that's really schmick. Like a schmick car or a schmick camera. Double pluggers is what we call thongs in Australia, or flip-flops in England, or I'm not sure in America what they're called.
Pretty sure flip-flops. I definitely encounter the word thongs here in Australia for the first time in front of a club, and it said no thong, and I was a little bit perplexed. How are you gonna check? Oh, this thing's for the feet. That's right.
Yeah, they're called double pluggers because they have two plastic plugs to hold them. And finally, this is a phrase straight to the pool room. This from an Australian film called The Castle. So when something's very special to you, like if someone gives you something special, you say, "Wow, that's straight to the pool room," which means you're going to keep it and treasure it and look after it.
Check out the movie so you understand where the phrase comes from.
Yeah, exactly. It is a funny movie as well. So obviously it's impossible to teach you all of the aspects of Australian vocabulary. There are too many words, and it depends where you're living. So the best thing to do is just listen. Open your ears and listen. You can watch Australian videos on YouTube, or you can watch Australian movies. And also, in the comments section, I'm gonna put a link to a really good vocabulary list of some common Australian terms.
And if you're really curious about the variation that there is across Australia, there's also a website, and we'll put the link, where you can see how, for the same thing, to refer to the same thing, different people in different places in Australia use a different word.
The final thing we're going to talk about is something which is really interesting in Australian English, which is hypocoristics. What is hypocoristics, Sophie?
These are basically just the words that you use in your day-to-day life, but you tend to shorten them. And I don't know, they sound really cute to me. And interestingly, there was a study, and it showed that people who use those forms actually come across as friendlier and very nice to people.
Yeah.
So it's a good thing to use.
Durries, fags,
ciggies, smokes,
snags,
Snaggers,
bangers, Avo, ambulance, ambo,
Ambo.
fiery,
Fiery.
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 chewy, sunnies,
Specs.
sunnies,
Sunnies.
Barbie.
Barbie,
Barbie.
Mozzie,
Mozzie.
Rego, toilet or dunny,
Dunny.
Dunny.
cuppa,
Cuppa.
footy,
Footy.
Footy.
servo,
Servo.
Servo.
ute,
Ute.
So the basic, some rules for making these forms is that the majority of the time we just remove the ending.
Yes.
So for example, an avocado would be an avo.
Yes, living in Perth here in Australia, there are lots of different suburbs, and a lot of people will say, I was in Freo last
Fremantle, Freo.
week.
Yeah.
Subi.
Subiaco.
You got
Yeah.
quite a few like that.
Yeah, so you can just remove the ending, or you can add a new ending. The majority, more than 50%, are with this E sound. Like for example, breakfast becomes brekkie.
Brekkie.
Also you can use the A. For example, a cup of tea would be a cuppa. Or an O, like afternoon, would be avo.
Yeah. The servo, service station, ambo.
Yeah, exactly. But if the word already ends in a vowel, then we can change the ending. Normally we change the ending. So for example, your name is Sophie, which ends in E already. So what do people call you?
Soph.
Soph.
They usually go for the shortening.
Soph, yeah. Or I might call you Sophs with another S. Or the Soph Star, Sophinator. I'm not sure, I can't think of any more right now. And this is the other interesting thing, is that sometimes we're making the word shorter, but other times we're making the word longer. Like the famous cricket player Shane Warne, everyone calls him Warnie, which is actually longer than the original. Okay, well that's the end of the class. Hopefully now you know everything there is to know about Australian English, and hopefully it will help you to understand if you come to Australia or if you're thinking about moving to Australia. Or maybe if you just want to live the Australian lifestyle. So thank you very much, Sophie.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And if you want to see any more videos about vocabulary, grammar, pronunciation, anything to do with English, then don't forget to subscribe. I'm Christian, and I'll see you in class. Bye-bye.
Bye.